Paper Mario 64, a retrospective review. In 2000, or 2001 for the US market, Nintendo released an RPG starring Mario that was originally intended to be a spiritual successor to the Super Nintendo's successful Super Mario RPG from several years earlier, entitled Paper Mario. As an 8-year-old, I had been playing games on my Game Boy Color and Nintendo 64 for a couple of years before this game came out. It is generally overlooked today in favor of its sequel, Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door for the GameCube. However, in my opinion, having played both, I have to say that, for me, Paper Mario 64 is superior both in terms of story and atmosphere, and had a major impact on me as a child. In this video, I will go over the details that I feel make Paper Mario 64 one of the greatest games Nintendo has ever created. I do want to provide a spoiler alert because I will be discussing some elements of the game's story in this video. What makes this game great? As a kid, I loved my fair share of platformers and racers. Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Yoshi's Story, Diddy Kong Racing, Donkey Kong 64. I had all these games as a kid, and I enjoyed them all quite a bit. In fact, if I'm being honest. However, there is a fact that I find rather telling. Paper Mario 64 is not the longest game of all time, and it can be completed in about 30 hours on average if you do some extra exploring and take your time. My first play file, which I still have and cherish, is over 100 hours of playtime long. I don't remember how this happened. I don't remember what I was doing in all that time, but I do remember what I felt as I played through Paper Mario 64 the first time. The late 90s were a golden age for RPGs, especially for kids, and I played my fair share of them. Every version of Pokémon, the Mega Man Battle Network series, these were my bread and butter in the late 90s and early 2000s. But for me, Paper Mario stood above them all at the time. So what made it so great for me? The aesthetic. Most games in the late 90s were 2D, and it was difficult to comprehend a video game taking place in a vast 3D world. Games like Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64 of course did take advantage of truly playing in a 3D space. But Paper Mario was a bit more special because it did that, and it looked much better doing so. Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64 were, even for their time, not very pretty games, and in retrospect, looking back at them, they look even worse. If I were to describe the aesthetic of Super Mario 64, I would probably say blocky, blurry. Paper Mario 64, however, is not a bad-looking game by any stretch of the imagination. The paper aesthetic, while looking really nice in the more modern Paper Mario games, was a brilliant move for this first game. It allowed the developers to make the game look especially good by utilizing this paper style, which allowed them to hide and overcome the N64's graphical weaknesses. There are less fully 3D objects and models to render, and the game runs great while looking exceptional for an N64 game. The animations, while they pale in comparison to those of the later games, are also great, and take advantage of the paper aesthetic to boot. This was a major factor in terms of world building. The developers that work for Nintendo are masters of utilizing stylized graphics to overcome the issues caused by underpowered hardware, and I would argue that Paper Mario 64 is one of the best examples of that. The story. The plot of Paper Mario 64 is not the most complicated. Bowser kidnapped Peach, again, and it's up to Mario, with no assistance from his brother Luigi, who stays at home, to save her and the whole kingdom. While it does not have many novel ideas, it takes a lot of RPG story elements and makes them fit right in with the Mario universe. The story, in the opinion of 8-year-old me, was epic, especially for a Mario game which typically was very light in terms of the story elements. The kidnapping of Peach is fleshed out in this story quite a bit more than the typical Mario game. Mario 64 throws you right in with barely an introduction. 2D Mario games, of course, are forbidden from having anything resembling a plot outline. Paper Mario gives the game a bit of flair from the start, as Bowser kidnaps Peach right out from under your nose, as he pummels Mario using his ill-gotten divine powers, cooks him with divinely enhanced flames, and finally summons divine lightning to send him flying out the windows of Peach's castle. However, this opening was just the beginning. The Mario universe was also fleshed out very well with other important elements. For example, it is revealed that people like Goombas and Koopas are not just Bowser's minions, but there are even normal, non-politically aligned families of them living spread out throughout the Mushroom Kingdom. There are even some that fight by your side. They have their own personal stories as well, that sometimes lead to side quests and have an impact on the main story. I want to mention that this last point is something major that is missing from the more recent Paper Marios that I hope is at least somewhat rectified in the newly announced Origami King. The design. The land in which Mario lives is expanded into a real, living, breathing space. As a kid, especially, this was quite breathtaking. While Mario games always had desert, sky, grass, and lava worlds, they never really felt alive, to me anyway. Even Super Mario 64, with its various explorable worlds, did not give me the feeling that the worlds were alive. They were stuck in the paintings, rather illogical and disjointed in terms of their design, and felt a little bit gamey to me. Again, not to detract from that masterpiece of a game. I'm just voicing my opinion. The level design in Paper Mario allows it to be a living, breathing, interconnected world. This stands in stark contrast to the worlds of some of the more recent Paper Marios, Sticker Star, where the regions of the world feel a bit disjointed, like they have no effect or connection to each other, or like they are in different planes of existence. I know this doesn't exactly apply to Origami King. They also suffer from feeling gamey, like they are just levels with obstacle courses and not living, breathing places. The soundtrack is also a major highlight in this regard. The sound design in general is excellent and contributes to the atmosphere of the game. Here I want to highlight all of the boss themes, which are all outstanding. The Gusty Gulch theme, the final Bowser battle tracks, and the theme of the Crystal Palace. The characters. The people living in the different locations are not just distinct species, but cultures as well. One of my favorite side characters that really makes the world feel connected and alive is a Koopa archaeologist, who you'll run into in different places throughout the story. It is tragic that he is absent in the more recent titles, as the humor related to his antics is some of the best in the game. The characters spread out in the world who are just living their lives really enhance the atmosphere of the game. Again, this stands in stark contrast to the worlds of some of the more recent Paper Marios, especially Sticker Star, where most of the characters are just different colored toads. I actually like the characters of Paper Mario 64 more than those in Thousand Year Door, as they feel a bit more in-universe to me, in my opinion. There are some characters to me that feel a bit out of place in Thousand Year Door, especially when compared to those in 64. The companions are also a very important feature of Paper Mario 64. When you first walk into the castle in Super Mario 64, you are greeted by the ominous laughter of Bowser and a text box. The castle is empty, except for a few toads, but I honestly didn't notice them for a while during my first playthrough. There is nobody to talk to, nobody coming to help, nobody to keep you company. You have to do everything by your lonesome. This is not so in Paper Mario 64. Several companions will join you on the quest as you travel throughout the world. This was a great feature that really made this game stand out and added more nuance to this Mario story, as your companions make quips about what's happening from time to time, depending on who you've chosen to accompany you at particular moments, as well as more strategy to the game, as all your companions have different abilities and are more suited to fighting certain enemies. Anyway, the companions are a great feature of Paper Mario 64 and the Thousand Year Door that I hope make a big return in this series. I understand that the Mario and Luigi RPG games utilize a lot of ideas regarding companions in battle, but since Mario's companion is always Luigi in those games, and Paper Mario as well in one of them, it doesn't feel the same. The bosses are also great characters in their own right. Their interactions with Bowser flesh out the various chapters of the story and even give you clues as to how to defeat some of them. I want to especially highlight Two-Ton Koopa, the second boss who is located in the desert ruins. It reminds me of Bowser in Super Mario 64. He constantly taunts you and warns you of your imminent doom as you make your way through the dungeon. When you finally confront him, it's quite a battle, since you fight him and his pet, Chain Chomp. The dungeons. I want to highlight the dungeons apart from the world, since all the dungeons in Paper Mario 64 are masterful in their own right. While some of the dungeons are self-contained, for example the Dry Ruins, the Koopa Brothers Castle, the Jungle Volcano, the Crystal Palace, some of the worlds don't have a particular dungeon you have to discover and explore, like Flower Fields and Gusty Gulch, for example. This inconsistency is great because it changes up the story, exploration, and gameplay, giving you a break from just having to do the same thing for each level. The Koopa Brothers Castle is an excellent introductory dungeon. It is not a complete pushover, but it also gives you a good introduction on how to play the game and makes you use all of the tools at your disposal, including companion special abilities, to solve its puzzles. The Dry Ruins are another great highlight, as it reminds me of Super Mario 64 in its atmosphere. Its boss taunts you from time to time as you slowly solve the puzzles in the dungeon. It also ups the ante in terms of difficulty when compared with the Koopa Brothers dungeon. I want to especially emphasize the excellent atmosphere in the snow area. This chapter begins with a murder mystery, and the mysterious vibe continues even after your icy reception. The climb up the mountain towards the abandoned Crystal Palace is also very well done, as it is difficult, lonely, and I feel cold and isolated just playing it. The idea that there is an abandoned palace frozen in the mountains is just brilliant, and reminds me of the 1950s film The Mole People that was featured on an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, where a team of archaeologists discover a Sumerian palace on a mountain. Once you get to the Crystal Palace, the theme starts playing, and it makes the dungeon feel especially eerie and creepy as you try to figure out the tricky puzzles of this dungeon. The confrontation with the Crystal King is also great. He isn't the most difficult boss, but after all the trouble he caused making you climb up a snowy mountain to defeat him, it feels good beating him for sure. The soundtrack. The soundtrack for Paper Mario 64 is absolutely perfect, one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. There was just so much effort put into it. Every major area has a unique piece of music composed for it, which are all memorable and catchy. And while most RPG-type games like to have the same music for most boss encounters, Paper Mario 64 has unique, phenomenal tracks for each one. Every single boss battle is accompanied by an epic and lengthy piece, and even the final battle with Bowser has a couple of different tracks for his different phases. Really, the soundtrack and overall sound design in Paper Mario 64 is the icing on the cake that really emphasizes how much effort was put into making this game as good and complete as possible. Conclusion. Well, these were just some of the reasons why Paper Mario 64 is one of my favorite games from my childhood, and why I feel it is still a masterpiece. Companions, a real interconnected world, interesting side characters, an epic story. These are the most important elements that make Paper Mario 64 not only a great game, but also a memorable experience, making it one of my favorite games of all time. Let's just hope Nintendo comes to its senses for the next Paper Mario game, or at least thinks about remastering Paper Mario 64 and the Thousand Year Door in a double pack, perhaps. Thanks for watching! This was quite a fun video to make, and it was definitely a nostalgic experience going back to Paper Mario 64. If you enjoy videos about games in general, retro games, nostalgia-filled experiences, modern gaming, strategy games, history games, and more, consider liking this video and perhaps subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.